It is a spiritual principle that money and material things are carriers of our affections. Wherever our treasure is, said Jesus, there our heart will also be. As parents, we are not only called by God to prepare our children to succeed in this life, God also calls us to prepare them for eternal life. So the way they use their finances may be an important contributor to help them to attach their hearts to this world or to the world to come. Therefore, providing an appropriate financial education for our children may help them succeed in this life and also be better prepared for eternity. One of the most fundamental teachings that must be conveyed to children in this area is that of dual partnership. God and I, God and they are partners. All we have, all blessings, including money, come from God. As everything comes from Him and belongs to Him, we should not consider ourselves as owners, but just stewards, managers of goods that the Lord has placed in our hands. How do we use money to teach children to experience life in its fullness? First, they must learn to consider life as the harmonious use of three God-given elements: abilities, physical strength, and time. All those three elements come from God and are given to each human being on loan. Without any one of those three, you no longer have life in its fullness, or you don't have life at all. In normal conditions, the productive and balanced use of those three God-given elements, abilities, physical strength, and time, should generate money. Money should be the natural product of a balanced use of those three God-given elements, and therefore God should be seen as the originator of money. Hence, when they spend money, children must learn that they are spending a bit of God's given life. When they save money, they are saving a part of that life provided by God. And when they give money, they're also offering a fragment of that life. And this is one of the reasons why giving is something so meaningful. Our life is in it. Therefore, as money is usually the product of God's given life, we should never waste it. Instead, we should never forget that all that we get in this world comes from Him. We are invited to reverently put God first in our financial life as in all else. When we recognize Him as the author of life and the originator of our money, which comes through the proper use of our, remember, abilities, physical strength, and of time, we and our children will put God first by returning to Him before any other use, our tithe and our regular and systematic offerings, which we call promise. As God's representatives or managers, we will be accountable to Him for the use of the gifts that He has bestowed upon us, money included. With this in mind, watch now what Pavel Goya's father taught to his children in Romania.
When asked about his parents, Pavel Goya, the ministry magazine editor, always has precious memories and teachings to share. Even though his dad was a prosperous construction contractor during the Romanian communist era, the family never had a fancy car, expensive furniture, or a big house. Simplicity was their lifestyle. His father would always say, "If things were better, we would promote God's work. Those are the treasures we have because we don't take anything except souls to heaven. So let's invest in souls." Once, when they were building a church, Pavel's dad came home with $25,000 after putting on a new school roof. When asked about how much they should return to God, the father said, "Give it all." And then his wife replied, let's keep $2,000 for the house, for emergencies." He agreed and said, "Okay, keep 10% and give 90%. Sometimes he would give half, depending on the needs of God's work, not their need. He would always say, "Who gave us the money? Who gave us health? He's going to give us more again. Give it all. Give it to the church." The family heard such statements repeatedly until it was so anchored into their mentality that their children would feel their duty to do the same. Living simply and giving liberally is something from above and should be encouraged even in the early years of a child. It will protect children from many materialistic and consumerist snares. You may give them a small, regular allowance, for instance, and teach them to put God first by returning tithe and promise, regular, systematic, percentage-based offerings before meeting any other expenses. According to Jesus, wherever your children put their money, there their hearts will be also.
In the book Child Guidance, page 248, Ellen White says that God has given to every child, not only to adults, a stewardship. But when is the right time to explain this truth to children? Well, the concepts of financial stewardship, including tithe and promise, which is regular and systematic offerings, can be explained to children as soon as they can count to 10 on their fingers. At home, children must be taught to remove God's portion first from all their allowances, by which I mean their tithe and promise. Learning how to give is a very important aspect of the development of their character. In addition to that, learning to give will impact their relationship with the Lord, attaching their hearts to God in heaven, as Jesus said. But how can they give if they don't own anything? Let me suggest two legitimate sources of income for children. We find those two sources of income mentioned in this Ellen White quotation in Counsels on Stewardship 294. Let the child learn the right use of money by using it, whether supplied by their parents, and we call this an allowance, or the second option, by their own earnings. And let me stop here to stress those two sources of income. First, an allowance supplied by the parents, or their own earnings. Some may wonder now about how children should use this money that will come to their hands. But the next part of this quotation says, "Let boys and girls learn to select and purchase their own clothing, their books, and other necessities. And by keeping an account of their expenses, they will learn the value and the use of money." How much instruction from the Lord in just one quotation. First, they must have an income, either from an allowance or from their own earnings. Then, following the notions that they and their family are partners, they need to take responsibility for some of their own expenses and maybe even participate in family life goal setting and financial planning. And finally, they must learn how to keep an account of their expenses. To illustrate family goals and to encourage participation, one family cashed in their entire salary and brought the cash home. To the children, the pile of money placed on the kitchen table seemed like a fortune. Then the parents discussed with the children the choices and expenses they had incurred as a family. So much for God's tithe and promise, so much for savings, food, home mortgage, transportation, education, doctor bills, allowances, etc. When they were through, there were only 3 lonely dollar bills left unassigned on the kitchen table. Then the parents went over with their children their assignments and chores as family members. Now, let me list some of the advantages for children of having a regular income, provided either by a small allowance or by their earnings. It may help in financial education. If rightly used, it is also training for adult financial life. It may teach how to save. By paying regular expenses, children will develop a notion of responsibility and planning. It will help them to learn financial organization and budgeting. It may develop sound spending patterns and habits. It may help to teach them how to put God first. It may also be a precious tool to help them learn the correct use of financial events. First to work, then to earn, after that to give, then to save, and only then to spend. When adults have not learned to follow this proper order of events, to work, then to learn, and to save, to give, and only then to spend, when they start by spending before working, before earning, before giving, and before saving, they will inevitably get into debt. If you, as a parent, will start to implement this program of providing allowances, I would like to suggest to use some important rules that may guide the process. My wife and I have adopted those rules while dealing with our daughters. If they manage to save money, obviously there will be a surplus, and it will be to their advantage. But if they spend all that they earn, there should be no extra allowance, as it happens in real life. We are never provided a new income if the money ends before the payment period is over. After a mutual agreement, they should be responsible for a list of expenses from now on. They should see it as a privilege and not as a punishment. They must present a simple report, accountability, before receiving the next allowance. This will provide an opportunity for parents to guide them in the right use of money. Ellen White in the book Adventist Home, page 386 says, when very young, children should be educated to read, to write, to understand figures, to keep their own accounts. But before everything else, she says, they should be taught that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. She also says that as parents, we are called to teach every youth and every child to keep an accurate account of their own income and outgoes. Let them learn the right use of money by using it, she says, on Constable Silver Ship, page 294. She says that if rightly directed, keeping an account of income and outgoes will encourage habits of benevolence because they will learn and practice the God first principle. And she keeps saying, it will aid the youth in learning to give, not, and pay attention on that, not from the mere impulse of the moment, as their feelings are steered, not moved by feelings, but regularly and systematically. There is a difference between giving according to the impulse of the moment, or as their feelings are steered, and giving regularly and systematically. God and His Word value regular and systematic giving because it is motivated by principle. This kind of giving is no longer dependent on the uncertain gifts of impulse and no longer will vary according to the changing feelings of the heart. This superior kind of giving is regular because it is given after any income. And as every income comes from God, it is He who determines the regularity of our giving because we will always give after His giving. It means that this giving is no longer subjected to human or earthly motivation. And it is systematic because it is given under the proportional system. By prayerfully choosing a percentage of the income to give as an offering, the worshiper will give more when they receive more, give less when they receive less, and give nothing when nothing is earned. And in this case, even while not giving anything, that person is considered by God as faithful because the decision to give has already been taken. The person and God know that if there will be an income, there will be giving of tithe and promise. But what is the difference between promise and sporadic or occasional free will offerings?
There are two main types of offerings.
Okay.
One is regular systematic offering, which we call promise, and two, sporadic or occasional free will offerings, which can be given for special appeals or projects, but only beyond and above promise.
I see. So when should I...
Hold on, I'm getting there. Now, our most fundamental motivation to give promise, regular and systematic offerings, should never be based on the needs of others, nor on any call made at church, or even on personal feelings or sympathies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our motivation must always be based on God's initiative to bless us with an income or increase, and be given as first fruits every time God gives us a financial blessing. For He is ever the first to give.
So we give when He gives, and after His giving.
Exactly.
And if you have received nothing from Him, and your income is zero, your tithe and promise will also be
zero. And you're considered faithful. On the other hand, if you don't return tithe or give promise every time you have an income, you fail to recognize God as the origin of life and of all blessings.
Fair enough. Everything makes sense now.
You sure?
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
I like this explanation. My returning of tithes and giving of promise offerings should not be controlled by external motivations like appeals, sympathy for good missionary projects or even for missionaries, or even by my feelings that can be so deceiving. Instead, the best motivation is to honor God, giving back to Him as an act of worship every time there is a financial blessing or income. Now, moving forward, analyzing the text that we read before the video on Counsels on Stewardship, page 294, we can see that it is very important for parents to teach figures to their children, to teach them the value and the use of money in a practical way, and to help them distinguish economy from the extremes of niggardliness from one side and prodigality from the other. Ellen White says that rightly directed, this teaching will encourage habits of benevolence, and children will learn to give not by impulse or feelings because they sympathize with a missionary or a missionary project, as we saw before, but they will give regularly and systematically. Now I will share with you what Mari and I did with our daughters. When they were teenagers, one of them came to me and told me that her classmate's father was giving an allowance to his daughter. And with this allowance, that girl was supposed to purchase a school uniform, clothes, sneakers, school books, and personal hygiene supplies. And my daughter looked at me as if she was saying, "Why don't you do the same with me?" At that time, I was the no man at home because our budget was very tight and I could not answer their request for money positively. Sometimes they will ask to go to a restaurant with their friends, for example, and I would say that we would not have enough money, and it was true. Other times they wanted to purchase new clothes and I would say no again. When they were overusing toothpaste and the excess toothpaste remained in the sink, I was the one asking them not to use more than what was needed. And all these annoyed them and me. One day, for example, one of my daughters asked me to purchase a quite expensive shampoo. Looking at me as if she was blaming me, she said, "Look at my hair. It doesn't look good. this shampoo we have here at home cannot deal with hair like mine. She looked at me as though I was responsible for what she saw as her terrible hair. But our budget would not allow us to purchase such an expensive shampoo as she was suggesting. So the only answer that came to my mind was what I heard my father saying many times. When you will have your own income, you will be able to purchase whatever you want, which was not exactly what she was expecting to hear. At that time, our country was facing a very difficult economic crisis. Inflation was rampant, and we did not have enough money for savings, which is a very dangerous situation for families. When my daughter told me about her friend that was receiving and using an allowance, it sounded like a possible solution to our problem. So I talked to my wife, and after calculating roughly what we were already spending per month with them, we called them and then started to explain the plan. We told them that we would give them money regularly each month. And when I said that, their eyes started to shine. We explained that it will be roughly the amount we were already spending with them each month, plus a little more so that they will be able to return their tithe and promise. They were not supposed to see that money as coming from us, but from God. They were extremely happy, even more when I told them that whatever they would save would belong to them. On the other hand, if they would spend all they earned, there will be no extra money before the next allowance. Another rule was that they will need to bring in a notebook a report showing all the income in one column and how they spend those resources in the other column. Then at the bottom, they will need to show the result of the month. They were excited. After receiving their first allowance, they decided to join us in going to the supermarket. They were so happy to act like adults. They took their shopping list, an empty cart, and left us, thrilled for the opportunity to purchase their own stuff. But their happiness did not last long. A few minutes later, they came back to us completely discouraged. "Dad," they said, "everything is so expensive. We are not able to purchase everything we need." I agreed with them. I knew very well what they were saying. Now they were experiencing what it meant to manage a family on a smaller scale and in a controlled and safe environment, far before they would have their own. So I said to them, "Go back to the shelves and look more attentively. Pray to God," and this is a principle, "every time you go shopping. And the Holy Spirit will guide you and lead you to make the best decision, because you have decided to use His money, even the one that remains in your hands after you have returned your tithe and promise. This money that remains in your hand to glorify Him." Then sometimes you may find something on sale, or you may choose a cheaper option. Look for them. When we later met at the cashier, they were no longer as happy as before, and I was very curious to see the kind of shampoo that they choose. To my surprise, they decided on a shampoo that was far cheaper than the one we would normally have at home. I know it was not the right thing that I did, but I couldn't avoid a question. "Will this shampoo be good enough for your hair?" I asked. And smiling, their answer was, "If it is not good for our hair, it will be good for our pocket." Another day, while passing by their bathroom, I found something very, very strange inside the trash can. It was an empty toothpaste tube cut in half, and I was wondering what happened to that toothpaste tube. So I asked them for an explanation. One of them, a little embarrassed, said to me that when the toothpaste was over, she imagined that there will be some remaining paste inside the tube. So with a scissor, she cut the tube in half to check and to scrub the remaining paste with the toothbrush. I was speechless. I was amazed about how quickly did they learn how to live and how to husband their resources. And I was no longer the no man. They were getting the necessary preparation for dealing with their finances in their adult life. Now, when to start giving the allowance? The plan can be started anytime after the ages of 6 or 7, assigning to them at that time only a few expenses. Their responsibilities, as well as the amount they receive, may be increased as they get older. Children younger than 6 or 7 may not be prepared to deal with the concepts of spending money wisely. How much should the allowance be? This depends upon the age and maturity of the child and the responsibilities agreed upon. Some of the mistaken uses of the allowance may be to encourage good grace or to influence behavior. Remember that when the allowance is used as a reward or punishment, the educational value is lost. This type of reward system corrupts the child and gives them a false sense of values. Even when the allowance is withheld as a punishment, the message to the child is, if you behave yourself, we will pay you. Therefore, in this case, the motivation for the child to behave well is cash. Are adults paid for behaving well, or should we have better, higher reasons for good behavior? Some parents, motivated by a misguided love, which is not love at all, give them too much. And sometimes they are unconsciously trying to replace themselves, their time, their attention, by money. Ellen White says that erroneous ideas exposed by parents about the use of money may expose youth, not only small children, but also youth, to many dangers. She says in Testimonies, Volume 2, page 473, that the youth are not to be carried along and supplied with money as if there were an exhaustible supply from which they could draw to gratify every supposed need. Money is to be regarded as a gift entrusted to us of God to do His work, to build up His kingdom. A very affluent leader of one of my churches in Sao Paulo, Brazil, would pick up his children in the Adventist boarding school on some weekends with his helicopter. But he would require his teenage children to sell evangelistic literature as colporteurs during their vacation, so that they could learn at the same time how to work for God and how to earn their own money. Very wise initiative. One of the boys is now a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. Now, how to use the allowance? It is important to remember that they need to use it to pay for some regular expenses. Otherwise, without purpose, money on their hands may be used by Satan as a curse instead of a blessing. Payment should not be based upon the performance of chores. If they save money, there will be a surplus. But if they lack money, there should be no extra allowance. Allow the child to make their own decisions, but please allow them to experience the consequences of their decisions. Before each new allowance, help them to evaluate their choices based on right principles. Chores should be performed because they are members of the family, not greed for more money. Children may be paid for some additional jobs. older children should be encouraged to increase their income by doing jobs outside the home. Make an annual review of the allowance amount and the expenses they should pay. Remember that they must periodically bring a report of their earnings, expenses, and the balance before receiving a new allowance. Let us recall what Ellen White says about the use of money by children on Councils on Stewardship 294. She says, whether supplied by their parents or by their own earnings, let boys and girls learn to select and purchase their own clothing, their books, and other necessities. And by keeping an account of their expenses, they will learn, as they could learn in no other way, the value and the use of money. Let's summarize the parents' role while teaching finances to their children. They must teach autonomy. By not supplying all the child's supposed needs, children may feel encouraged to earn their own money. Parents should teach the right use of money according to Christian spending patterns. Another thing is to teach how to keep a simple account, how to help others who are in need. Children should also be taught not to rely on credit. Also, how not to be enslaved by debt. The importance and priority of having savings. To develop the habit of putting God first in their finances by returning their tithe and promise offering. So help your children by discouraging them from borrowing money. My mother taught me an important lesson for life when she encouraged me to play with my own toys and not to play with toys borrowed from my friends, my neighbors. She would ask me to return them when I would bring them at home. Use and count on what you have and not on what you don't have. Help children by also not promoting indolence. If you make their lives too much easy, they will not be motivated to work and to earn for themselves. Some are spoiled by their parents and so are ruined for adult life and for eternity also, because they receive everything that they suppose they need. Also help children by not giving them all, even if you have the financial capability to do so. In the book Adventist Home, page 390, Ellen White points some common mistakes that parents commit. They do the most they can to put their children in a position of wealth. Another mistake is that they surround their children with abundance. Other mistake is that they supply all wants and imaginary needs of their children. The following mistake is that they not allow them to develop the virtue of frugality. Other parents not allow them to appreciate every trifling good. A sophisticated lifestyle will likewise produce spoiled children unable to thrive by themselves. A sophisticated lifestyle will provide a very weak, complaining, and unhappy children, unable to thrive independently. It is only when they need to work by themselves to succeed that their characters are built up in a balanced way. Knowing this, we encourage our daughters to work part-time while they were studying at the Adventist boarding school in Brazil, even though I was receiving a significant allowance from the church for their education. I knew that they would need to learn how to work, and work, which is a blessing invented by God, would prevent them from having much time to think on improper things. Ellen White says that money which comes to the young with but little effort on their part will not be valued. Some have to obtain money by hard work and privation. But how much safer are those youth who know just where their spending money comes from, who know what their clothing and food costs and what it takes to purchase a home. Adventist Home, page 387. Here is a summary of what we learned so far.
How can we help your children develop wise management of their resources and to invite God into their financial life? Let's see what Ellen G. White suggests. That parents and teachers should make the study of figures something practical very early in children's lives. Children should learn through practice how to rightly use money. This money may be supplied by the parents as an allowance or be earned by the child. It should be used to purchase their clothing, books, and other necessities. They must be taught how to select and purchase those necessities. They must keep an account of their expenses. A report of expenses is strongly encouraged, which could result into getting the next allowance. If they are taught to put God first, they will choose tithe and promise as the first two actions after any new income is received. Then their savings will be the next, all before any other expenses may be met. It will lead them to a life of simplicity and frugality, more in line with a Christian lifestyle. Ellen G. White also says that teaching those lessons at a young age will not only encourage habits of benevolence, but will also teach them how to give, not from the mere impulse of the moment, but regularly, systematically, and will help them to remember who is the source of their income, linking their hearts to the one who is the real provider. By providing an allowance and this kind of education, parents are preparing their children not only to have a more successful life on this earth, but also eternal life.
By now, you may have already decided to provide a small allowance to your children so that they may learn to manage their finances while under the protection of their parents. But more than that, by the appropriate use of their allowances, they will learn the very important lesson of putting God first. You will never see young people living God's ways while tithing and giving their promise. May God give us the privilege to see all our children in heaven. God bless you.